Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our webinar will be beginning shortly. Just to begin, I wanted to mention a few upcoming webinars that we'll have. On August 12th, Hayami Koga will present on positive psychological functioning, work, and health as part of our industrial hygiene series in collaboration with the New York, New Jersey Education and Research Center. Then on August 20th, we're going to have Mark Vargas presenting on the history of OSHA ergonomics, also in collaboration with the New York, New Jersey ERC. And then lastly, on October 14th, we have another industrial hygiene webinar on the research done by Diana Ceballos entitled Evaluating Degreaser VOC Exposure in auto shops using air sampling and biomarkers. For more, you can always visit COEH at berkeley.edu/webinars. So now getting started. On behalf of education and research centers throughout the country, we are pleased to present the Occupational Health and Safety webinar series. This collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program aspires to provide access to current research supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Unfortunately, as you may all be aware, approximately 92% of NIOSH was terminated in April, and we need your help. Although we welcome the return of some NIOSH staff members since April, severe cuts continue to jeopardize the agency's mission to keep workers safe. These free webinars would not be possible without the support of NIOSH and NIOSH-supported education and research centers. You can learn more about how to support occupational health and safety in the US by visiting this link that I'll also put in the chat, www.coeh.berkeley.edu/save-NIOSH. If you have a NIOSH success story, we would love to hear it. Please email cohce@berkeley.edu. Thank you for being here today and showing your support. We're going to continue showing up for workers and doing everything we can to keep people safe and healthy. Now, for today's webinar, we have What Should Employers Do to Protect Their Workers in Emergencies, presented in collaboration with the Labor Occupational Health Program. Just a few housekeeping items first. You will be muted during this presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please enter it into the Q&A box. We will save time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. We'll also have the chat open. Feel free to use it and participate and join the conversation. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page within 5 business days. Additionally, all participants who logged in with their registration email for the full live presentation today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to an evaluation form that will qualify participants for a certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. Once the evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. Now, I am pleased to introduce our moderator, Alejandra Domenzain. Alejandra Domenzain is a program coordinator at UC Berkeley's Labor Occupational Health Program, where she develops and implements initiatives to improve workplace health and safety for a variety of low-wage immigrant and POC workers in high-hazard industries through training and education, policy, and research. Alejandra, passing it along to you.
Thank you, Will, and thank you to COEH for hosting this. And welcome, everyone. I want to start out by introducing LOHP. So our mission is to promote safe, healthy, and just workplaces, but also to build the capacity of workers and worker organizations so that they can take action for improved working conditions. And I'm going to be introducing the panelists as they come up, so you have it fresh in your mind who they are. So Will, if we could actually start the slideshow, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much. So just to start out, like, what do we mean when we talk about emergencies? So in the next slide, we have kind of a long list, which will be familiar to you. And you'll see kind of on the left, there's a cluster that like fires, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes that, are things that are natural phenomena and kind of in the past they've been referred to as acts of God. That's actually even in like labor law, that term, because then employers have in some cases like less responsibility because it's, it's not their fault. It's not in their control. Maybe they don't have to pay their workers if they send them home, for example. But really, all these are weather events that are often now caused or exacerbated by climate change. So it's not just an act of God now, but really an act of humans. It's something we can control. And then there's a whole other range like power outages, gas leaks, chemical spills, toxic emissions, vehicle accidents that of course occur on their own, but also are associated with some of these other natural disasters. Even disease outbreak is affected by climate change. So warming weather, causes different climates that then increases, like vectors like mosquitoes or other animals that spread disease, or climate refugees, or closer together, and then transmission of diseases happens more quickly. So just I think this is kind of the dark side, but then the positive is there's a lot that we can do when there's a human element to some of these. And then on the right, you see other types of human cost emergencies, like vehicle crashes, still one of the major leading causes of death in the US, and definitely one of the major causes of death in the workplace, about 120 people killed in crashes every day. And mass shootings, which, fluctuate over the years, but there's a general rise as well. Most of the mass shootings are likely to occur in workplaces and schools, both of which we're going to talk about today. And just to give you a sense, there's already been 261 mass shootings in the United States just so far in 2025, according to the Gun Violence Archive. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Some of the very high profile disasters that have happened really point to how systems that are or are not in place affect what happens. So in the Los Angeles fires, for example, that forced more than 200,000 people to evacuate, it raised a lot of issues about the water supply and the pressure to fight the fires, the staffing and funding for firefighters, for example. Another one that we heard a lot about was the Texas flooding. I mean, the death toll was over 130 people, including 37 children. And there was very serious issues about the warning and communication systems and funding for FEMA to respond quickly. And, lastly, the New York City subway system is an example where, this is outdated facilities that aren't really equipped for these new weather events, like the drainage system and the pumps and so on. So again, the kind of the good news of this is that there are things that we can do differently. And unfortunately, in the next slide, this is really important because this is a new normal, right? This is only gonna, unfortunately, likely to get worse unless we do something different. So why does this matter? First and foremost, loss of life. And also even, when the event is over, it's not over yet. There's a lot of long-term health effects. So for example, wildfire smoke, it has a range of long-term effects, including asthma, cancer, preterm births. And then there are all those workers that have to deal with the cleanup, right? And in many cases, people are brought in that don't have the training, don't have the right equipment. And so they face all those hazards for the cleanup and the reconstruction. And then all the other, ripple effects, the loss of jobs and income, mental health effects, which can linger. We'll talk a lot about that today. Economic stress, and then, though there's less housing, so now people have that stress, they lose their insurance when they lose their jobs. So just incredible, human cost and a cost of public health. So, well, we can stop sharing the slides now. Thank you, Will. And I want to introduce the first panelist, Wendy Lockhart. And all of these panelists, by the way, have very illustrious careers. So I'm just going to give you the, their current standing right now. Wendy Lockhart has been in education for over 30 years. Both as a classroom teacher and as staff for the California Teachers Association, CTA. Currently, she serves as the lead specialist for traumatic events and assistant management within the CTA. And so, Wendy, I wanted to start with you because you shared a story with me that I think really illustrates, it's kind of a tale of two schools, right? What happens when a workplace is ready for an emergency, and what doesn't, what happens when it doesn't. So can you tell us that story, please?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I have this story to tell, which is why we need to talk about these things. But this happened about 3 years ago on the Friday morning before spring break on a record heat day in the desert. Two schools side by side, a high school and a middle school. There was a gas leak in the area that caused the evacuation of both schools at the same time. The high school, the evacuation went very smoothly. Everybody knew what to do. They had their command posts, they had their walkie-talkies, they had water, they had shade, they had everything, they were set. The middle school next door was a completely different story. So at the middle school, they didn't know that it was a real event. They thought it was a drill. The people at the high school knew that this was real, so they took all of their things with them that they needed. That didn't happen at the middle school. They thought they'd only be out on the field for a few minutes. This is a drill and we'll just be right back in. So they left most of their things in their classrooms. The principal at the site was fairly new. All of the shade structures were right next to the buildings, so they were not allowed to stay in the shade. They had to go move out to the farther part of the field. They did not have water. There was no water available on campus that they could get to because they weren't allowed in the buildings. They had no sunscreen, no shade, and they were out there for hours. Eventually, district office staff brought over water for them from other locations. But at one point, one of our members suffered a heat stroke and collapsed, passed out, and 911 had to be called. At that point, staff moved her under the shade structure just to try and get her to cool off. And fortunately, she ended up being okay in the long run. But, unfortunately at that site, and this was both staff and students, were sunburned, dehydrated, and pretty traumatized by the entire event. And then after the kids were allowed to go home, then you have the issue of reunification. So this is something that people don't think of. You've got a school of 700 children that all need to be unified with their parents, and you need to determine that actually is somebody who you're supposed to give them to. If you haven't planned for that, that also takes a very long time. So this, what should have been a great day, a Friday before spring break, was just completely ruined.
I'm curious, like, what happened afterwards? What was learned from that incident? Did anything change?
You're probably going to be shocked that, yeah, nothing really changed. Well, so first we were trying to get the principal to just meet with the staff. So they were gone for a week. Staff came back and the principal didn't want to address the issue at all. Everything's fine, back to normal. We'll just forget this happened. And we were not willing to do that. So we forced a meeting with her and the staff, and which did not go well. And so we kept digging. So in education, there are two different plans that really oversee disaster preparedness. So one is under OSHA, and that's the Injury and Illness Prevention Plan. But we also have this plan that's through the Department of Education called the Comprehensive School Safety Plan. And so OSHA and the CD overlap in this. And these comprehensive school safety plans have a very specific timeline for how you revise, adopt, and implement and train people on the plan. And so in our digging, we discovered that the plan for that site had not been updated in 3 years, had not been approved by the school board, and nobody in the school had been trained on the plan. And this was a site with particularly high turnover in staff. So we had new management, 20% of the teachers are new that year. So nobody really knew what to do. Ed Code 32280 through 32288 is what governs those. And so what we started doing was really pushing on the district to make sure that A, these plans were updated, and that B, they started training people on the things that are in the plans, because you can have a great plan on paper, but if nobody knows how to implement it or what to do, then it's really worth nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that you're really highlighting the role of the union here, right? Because the principal didn't want to do anything at the district level, it wasn't happening. So just tell us more about that. Like, how is CTA supporting their locals in doing this and being prepared for future emergencies?
Yeah, so we have a really multi-pronged approach. So we represent 300,000 members in the state in over 1,000 school districts. And we have a lot of department staff that help with this. The safety part is actually just a very small part of my job, but I do help coordinate with other people in CTA that also work on safety. So for example, our legal department keeps an updated safety toolkit that has all of the laws and Ed Code and how they're applied and what to do if they're violated or not implemented. We have a governmental relations department that liaises with other unions on a regular basis and helps to strengthen our safety laws and the implementation of those. We have a professional development department, and I work for the Center for Organizing and Bargaining. And so we really help educate members, because in unionism, we educate first, then we agitate and escalate as needed. So since that incident, we have really ramped up our amount of education that we're doing, and we're really getting into the agitation and escalation point to get these safety things going. So we also have, we train at conferences and trainings, and I work with the locals in Riverside County directly to help them with organizing plans around safety and how they can get the community involved, because parents also have a very vested interest in their kids being safe at school. And then we have Team Cadre, which is what I'm in charge of, which is our traumatic events assistance and management team. And we help after an event for whatever support people might need. And that group was born out of a mass shooting, I think that was in Fresno 25 years ago, where nobody knew what to do afterwards. It was one of the first kind of big school shootings. Fortunately, districts, I think, have done a much better job of at least getting a plan on paper. So they're more prepared for those kinds of things. But it's so hard to prepare for everything that can happen in any scenario. So, and then the last thing, we have our primary contracts staff. Oh, Stockton, thank you. That's the one. Oh, hi, Chris. I know Chris. Our primary contact staff also help to locally bargain good contract language, because it's that good contract language where we can really hold the districts accountable for keeping employees safe.
That's such an impressive infrastructure that the union has. Do you find that just teachers on the ground are kind of taking it upon themselves and organizing, and how does the union support them when they do that?
So, for example, I did a training, and the president from the Riverside Teachers Association came, and she went back and the next day had her site reps go ask all of their principals for a copy of the comprehensive school safety plan. And half of them were told, oh, we can't give that to you. So, sometimes it just starts with something that small. Just, the first thing I train people to go ask for a copy of the plan. And if you can't get that, well, then we know that there's a lot more work we need to do. The other thing that we're, again, really doing is helping to strengthen that contract language. So Santa Rosa Teachers Association just bargained a new 8-page safety article. So it allows them to have representation on safety committees. So instead of the principal having to do this in their office by themselves, which a lot of them feel pressure to do that, it creates a team at the site that can really bounce ideas off of each other and make sure that we have more avenues covered in the language, and then we can hold them accountable through the language. But we really need to focus on not just the planning, but the training is key.
That's amazing, Wendy. And thank you also for mentioning other stakeholders, like the students and the families, because I think all of us probably know someone, right, that's in school in our lives.
Yeah. Well, and just another note on that, one of the things that's really hard for some school districts is they cover multiple municipalities. One of our local districts here covers 10 different cities.
Wow.
So that's one district that now has to work with 10 different emergency agencies, and it can just be really overwhelming. So not that we're here to talk about how to simplify that, but
Well, I think you guys are off to a really good start. Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy. And I know that you also had some resources of sample plans that you're going to share in the chat. So we'll see.
Yeah, so there's a couple of websites. One is our CTA Team Cadre website, which has some information materials there. And I believe that one is available even if you're not a member. Some of our things are, behind the firewall. And then the other is the California Department of Education page on the comprehensive school safety plans. They have a ton of resources and information there. One of my favorite tools is their CSSP compliance tool, because it lays out, here's the ed code, here's what they're supposed to do, here's what you should be looking for in the plan. So that's a great tool. So lots of good things there.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy. We
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. Well, so we're actually going to pivot to that, right? If we know that CalOSHA does require all employers to have an emergency action plan, how do you have a good plan? And so we have an expert to tell us more about that. Jason Ferguson is the director of UC Berkeley's Office of Emergency Management and holds more than 2 decades of interdisciplinary experience in emergency preparedness. And so yeah, so tell us, Jason, what are employers required to have in their plan? And really, I would love to know, not just like beyond the basics, right? That it's required by California. Your goal isn't just like check the boxes and compliance, but you really want something that's comprehensive, that's effective, right?
Yeah.
Give us also some examples, like what are some best practices that you've seen in your long career to make sure that it's good on paper, but then that it's implemented well. And then, like Wendy was saying, it doesn't do any good if it's just gathering dust and obsolete, right? Like how do you make sure that it's like continuously updated and relevant?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have some thoughts on all of that. First of all, hello everyone who's joining today, and thank you, Alejandra, for the invitation to be a part of this incredible discussion. There are so many opportunities for improvement at this level and building out effective EAPs. I definitely wanted to share some insights on that. Will, if you don't mind, can you share the slides, please? Awesome. Thank you. So I titled this Protecting All Workers Amid Crisis, the Importance of Prioritizing Inclusive Emergency Action Planning. You can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about me. As Alejandra said, I have 20 years of preparedness experience. Before coming to UC Berkeley last January, I was the exec director of emergency management at Tulane University. So my career, I've been in different sectors. I've been in the private sector as a consultant on the emergency management front, and then many years in the higher ed emergency management space. And I am a proud bear. Happy to be here at UC Berkeley. Next slide. So talking about the basics, things that we want to see in an emergency action plan, employers should be delineating the process for employees to report fires or other emergencies. So, being able to share that information with the employer to say, hey, I see something that needs to be addressed, that should be delineated in an EAP. The process that employers will use to alert employees of emergencies. That's another one. So that employees are keenly aware of how they will be alerted if there is an emergency. And procedures for emergency evacuation, including routes for evacuation. We obviously want that to have an accessibility lens applied to it because not all folks are able to evacuate the same. And then procedures for sheltering in place. If there's an emergency situation where individuals are not advised to leave their workplace, what are those procedures for staying put and remaining safe inside? An EAP should have procedures for to be followed by those employees who are performing rescue and medical duties, as well as those employees who are tasked with remaining on site to take care of critical functions before they themselves evacuate. And then procedures to account for all employees after an emergency evacuation. And then lastly, I'll just highlight contact information for individuals or departments who can provide additional clarity if employees have questions about what's in the EAP. Next slide. So going beyond the basics, we realize that employers are required to provide a safe workplace, which includes being prepared for emergencies. And I just want to reiterate that this work should be approached with an equity lens. We want to promote safety for all employees. And it is really, unfortunate that we've seen time after time a lot of planning efforts for emergencies, and it's only planning for subsets of the population, not the whole community. And so, really thinking about an inclusive view of who actually works here and how do we ensure that considerations are built into this plan for all that are impacted by an emergency at this entity. And so beyond the basics, we were looking at accessibility, accessible communication plans, and we're thinking multilingual and multimodal. So not just one way of communicating, not just in English, but what are the multilingual and multimodal ways in which we can communicate with our population? And that obviously takes an understanding of who's on the roster. Tailored safety considerations for employees with disabilities or others with access and functional needs, integration into local jurisdictions' emergency response framework. What good is it to have a plan at the business level that does not align with the local jurisdiction? And so if the local jurisdiction is calling for an evacuation, I think it is important for the business to be able to say, well, the jurisdiction is calling for an evacuation. Here's how we fold into that, and so that there could be a seamless response. And then equity focused preparedness. Sometimes a lot of effort is focused on day shift. What about the night shift? Who's going to conduct training for the folks who work night shift? And then what about the difference between salary versus hourly staff and who can actually access training? Salary employees could go to training and they're still getting paid, but what about hourly employees? Do we create opportunities for hourly employees to still participate in trainings and exercises in the same way that salaried employees might be able to do? Then opportunities for constructive feedback from employees to enhance the plan. Two-way feedback or two-way communication is important. Having an opportunity to share as an employee, to share, hey, here's a way that I believe we can enhance our emergency action plan. And then trainings, drills, and exercises throughout the calendar year. That's important because to Wendy's point, and to Alejandra's point earlier, having a plan is great, but for folks to have, awareness of the plan and then their roles in it, how they would function if the plan was activated, that is best achieved by providing opportunities for folks to train, to participate in drills and exercises. And then annually, at a minimum, the plan should be reviewed and updated and shared. And I say at a minimum because in some instances, there are new learnings when there is an actual real world emergency. And we don't want to wait until that annual review to incorporate those new learnings. We can actually do that after that real world emergency. Next slide, please. And I'll just very, at a high level, share just an example of kind of how these functions work together. UC Berkeley, in many ways, is like its own small jurisdiction. And the 150 buildings across our core campus, that's an approximate number, are like their own businesses. And as a jurisdiction, I'm thinking about the overall campus-wide emergency operations plan, but our department works closely with each department across the university and each building to promote their building specific planning efforts. And again, this kind of forms an ecosystem where if the university is detecting an emergency and alerting the campus community about an emergency, we're relying on those individual departments and buildings to have their own plans to be able to more acutely protect the employees and students who are functioning within those spaces. We actually have a comprehensive training and exercise program. In fact, at UC Berkeley, we just hired a brand new training and exercise coordinator. And so we will be rolling out even more training and exercise opportunities to engage our entire community. But the piece that I spoke about earlier in terms of promoting inclusivity and access for all, we're working closely with colleagues across the campus to ensure that our efforts are as inclusive as possible. And then ongoing community outreach and engagement, every opportunity we can find ourselves at a tabling event to share preparedness tips and to promote visibility on our overall preparedness posture as a campus. We're taking those opportunities to get out and engage with folks. And with that, I will close out with one last statement. And, I want to really drive this point home when it comes to advocating for strong and inclusive EAPs. A well-designed emergency action plan is not just a compliance checklist. It is a frontline defense for worker health, safety, and dignity. To advocate for strong, inclusive EAPs is to advocate for workplace justice. And I just want to say thank you to you all for the work that you're doing to advocate for workers everywhere.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was incredible. And I love what you said about the inclusivity and also that having worker input. I feel like workers are the experts, right? They're the ones that are on the front lines. They know what's going to work. They know what the
That's
problem is.
right.
They know what's a, practical solution. So that seems really powerful to me. And I also wanted to give an example. You used the word multimodal training. I think multilingual people will know, but one example of that is at LOHP, we work with a lot of workers that have low literacy levels, or at least in English or Spanish or whatever the language we're doing the training in. And so that's an example where you have to adapt. You can't just give people like a piece of paper that's written with legalese and then expect that to be effective, right? So
Right.
factoring literacy levels, for example. Yeah, thank you so
Absolutely.
much. That was great. That was really, I feel like that gives us such a great framework of how to do it right. Like if you have the resources and thoughtful and amazing people like you, like this is what it takes, right? And that mix between the local level, but then also having like the higher level infrastructure. So thank you so much.
My
And
pleasure.
actually, something you said kind of helps us segue to our next section, which is when an incident occurs, how do you learn from it, and as soon as possible so that you can implement those learnings to prevent future casualties and damage. So to that end, I want to introduce Theo Leanman, and he's actually a research scientist right here at LOHP, and he specializes in worker mental health and violence prevention. His background is in program evaluation and community-based participatory research. And Theo is going to tell us about a really amazing model that is trying to do just that, right? It came out of a terrible event, and how do you learn from that in order to then make the response be part of that cycle to be the prevention, right, for the future. So Theo, tell us a little bit about the Santa Clara VTA Resiliency Center. Like why was it formed? How did it come about? What are the elements of it? And I'm specifically interested in hearing about the role of the union in this collaboration.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Alejandra, and thanks also to Wendy and Jason for your remarks. It's been a lot of great information for me to learn as we're going. Will, if you could bring up the slides that Alejandra presented earlier, I think we left off on number 6. Yeah, that's great. So on May 26th, 2021, the Bay Area experienced its deadliest shooting, a mass shooting killing 9 workers at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, and 1 more worker took his own life in the following days. In response to this tragic incident, the legislature passed a bill that allocated $20 million to create the 526 Resiliency Center, named after the date of that event. It includes counseling and supportive services for employee mental health. Now, the Wellness Center offers both one-on-one and group counseling, and also therapeutic access to services for family members. It has drop-in hours and has criminal service navigations in case an operator experienced an incident that was violent with the public and wanted to pursue their legal recourses. Importantly, it also offers education and stress management and coping training. And this center would not have come about without efforts by ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, which was instrumental in both identifying needs at the agency and working with politicians to craft this legislation. Importantly, this mental health support and treatment is seen as both crisis mitigation and ongoing violence prevention, since coworker on coworker violence results from stressful and destabilizing work environments. So one silver lining of this tragedy was that the recognition of transit as a high-risk industry has helped us realize that there are several occupations that face violence from the public on a day-to-day basis. And so not only are we responding to a crisis in this instance, but we're learning how we can better support worker mental health as they face day-to-day trauma. So the Resiliency Center is paired with additional services at the agency that recognize ongoing threats, provide education on mental health to destigmatize it in the organizational culture, and importantly, it put in place a peer-to-peer mentorship program that trains employees in basic mental health awareness and makes it so that peer coworkers have someone respond to their stressful incident that understands what they have in their lived experience and can relate to what they're going through. The program also provides threat assessment to identify new upcoming threats, and it has a provision of additional mental health days in recognition of the threats that transit workers face daily. Next slide. So I want to be careful in framing the successes of this program because this is all still being documented. And with such a painful and massive tragedy, it takes time for healing to occur. And it also takes time to learn from what's been put in place. Organizational change around mental health takes a lot of education and takes involvement from leadership and workers. However, while we might still be recommending different versions of these approaches, there are definitely some things in the approach that are promising in themselves that I wanted to pull out and highlight. So it's something that we might see in future interventions following a crisis going forward. Namely, the funding bill stipulated the creation of a joint labor management committee. I mentioned earlier the involvement of the Amalgamated Transit Union, and they had to partner, as well as the membership from the other 4 unions, with leadership in management to implement all of the programmatic elements of this intervention. So that funding bill created the Joint Labor Management Committee, and that committee is active to this day in overseeing how those funds are dispersed and what the actual strategic elements of each of those components of the intervention actually look like. I also mentioned earlier the importance of mental health education and culture shift as prevention. In the context of violence, a lot of what occurs is because of the stressful conditions that we face as workers. So thinking about mental health, having a language that we're comfortable using together to talk about our mental health challenges, this actually serves as violence prevention in itself. And to highlight one more time the importance of that peer worker leader model, it identifies workers as experts in their own life courses. They are the ones that face perilous conditions day to day as they're operating a bus or light rail. They interface with public that has varying needs of mental health for themselves, and they can identify these threats and elevate the conditions that need to change for management and leadership. So that joint labor management approach is one really promising element that could make workplaces safer going forward. Next slide. Excitingly, LOHP, the Labor Occupational Health Program, has been tapped with the role of evaluating the impact of this intervention. So we have the opportunity to conduct a mixed method study to identify best practices. But while it's rare that a worker organization experiences a crisis and then receives such substantial funding as $20 million, many of the lessons learned about the challenges in planning and implementing these changes will apply elsewhere. So in particular, the identification of transit as one of many high-risk industries that face performance pressures, interface with the public, and have a tough kind of make it work no matter what attitude teaches us something about how we can improve access to mental health and also appreciation for utilizing that access in this context, which will certainly transition to other industries where we have people doing necessary jobs under high pressure and they need some support along the way. I'm happy to pause for any questions that you have, Alejandra.
Well, thank you, Theo. I mean, I think this is such an amazing contribution for all the reasons that you said, right? I mean, transit workers are in a very specific industry, but some of the variables that you referred to, you know, working in stressful conditions, I think applies to a lot of industries. And then things like dealing with the public or even being isolated, right? You don't necessarily have a lot of colleagues if you're alone on a bus. So can you give us a sense of when we'll have a little bit more from this project?
Yeah, absolutely. So our research team is tasked with giving some initial recommendations to the legislature this fall, but the report won't be fully publicly available until the following March. But one of the components that you just mentioned about the isolation is certainly really important. And I think one of the things that I've seen firsthand just going down to the sites and visiting is the importance of relationships in these jobs and having someone to talk to about what you're going through. And so while I'm a mental health professional and really value the importance of people that go through really advanced training in these fields, oftentimes it's not the most advanced trained professional that a worker needs to talk to. It's someone who understands their own experience firsthand. So when you finish your driving for the day and you go back to the yard, do you have a group of friends that kind of can relate to your experience? And having that formalized in this peer-to-peer support structure is something that's really interesting. And I'm curious about how it might be applied to other fields.
I love that. And it also speaks to what you said that, this particular project has such generous funding, but a peer-to-peer model, right, is something that in theory could be set up somewhat, on a larger, but on a smaller budget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things that's a resource that you already have on site because you already have these great workers who know the violence that they face in their experiences. And so if you're willing to pay them for their time to do that extra chore of being there for each other, it's definitely going to be money well spent.
I love that. And I love it that it's on paid time, that you're not asking people that are already stressed and stretched in to do
Absolutely.
something extra. So
As it should be.
very important. Well, thank you so much, Theo. That's such a valuable model for us to consider. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you for including me. It's been great to share.
Thank you. And Will, I think we're ready for the last few slides. So before we open it up for questions, so start thinking about the questions that you want, I just want to kind of round out. So we heard from Jason about emergency action plans that are required, but employers in California have several responsibilities. So besides the emergency action plan, Wendy also referred to this. All employers need to have an injury and illness prevention program. So that's for everything, basically any hazard that could come up in the job. There needs to be a plan. It needs to be in writing. It needs to be actually implemented. Ideally, as we talked about, workers are involved in, coming up with it so that it actually matches the real world conditions and what they need. Workers also have a right to refuse dangerous work. So if they have, a reasonable opinion that it would be dangerous to do the task or to be in the place that they're being asked to do, they may decline and be free from retaliation. And this protection for retaliation also applies to other things like, reporting hazards or illness and injuries, basically any labor right. And then there are some things that are kind of hazard or emergency specific. So in California, we have a hazard communication standard. So for example, we were talking about the cleanup workers, right? The employers have to communicate what are the substances that you're going to be exposed to, and then, what's your plan to protect them from those things. California passed a wildfire smoke standard in 2019, so that, depending on the AQI, employers have to also minimize exposure to smoke, provide respirators, that kind of thing. Our outdoor heat standard was from 2006, and we have a, brand new indoor heat standard for people that work in places like warehouses or buses, restaurant kitchens where it can get really hot. Again, employers, there's certain triggers at certain levels of temperature where employers have to take measures to mitigate. We also have a fairly new workplace violence law, SB 553, that requires a plan, also prevention training, a log to document what's happening and find patterns of problems so they can be addressed. And also a fairly recent law is workers' rights in emergencies, SB 1044. And so that is that employers can't retaliate if workers don't report to work or if they leave because they have a reasonable belief that it's dangerous. And also they can use their cell phones to, call for help, communicate with loved ones, get information. And if you're thinking why would you need a law for that? Well, because it wasn't happening, right? So there was one, some recent wildfires in California where we were hearing those stories from workers that, everyone else was being evacuated, but the farm workers are being brought in to harvest the crops, or, homeowners would ask domestic workers or day laborers to stay and defend, the property. So yes, workers may not be asked to work in dangerous conditions. So what can we do? Go to the next slide. Well, for workers, what can you do? First, know your rights. There are many. Second, talk to other workers about their experiences and concerns, right? Because the more you act collectively, the more effective it'll be. And also when you act collectively, there are additional protections from retaliation that you're entitled to. If you can, document the problems and then try to identify the most protective solutions. Some employers, like Jason was describing, are just really conscientious and are trying to have, invest all the resources that it takes to really protect workers. But Some are, they're trying to do what's easiest or what's cheapest or just what they know, right? They're not experts on this. So sometimes it's kind of falls on workers or unions or worker centers to really push for, no, you know what is most protective is this. And it might not be the cheapest or the fastest, but it's what workers deserve and it's what we need. Then, ask your employer for better protections. Again, if it's possible to do it collectively, provide some extra protection. And then organize. We've seen all the ways that unions have played such a crucial role in getting better protections. And if it can't be like an official union, just some other way to have voice and agency in the workplace. And, you can get support from a wide range of organizations. And then lastly, there's always an option to file a LOHP complaint. And, a complaint can be anonymous, or even if a worker gives their name, the inspector will not tell the employer who it was that filed the complaint when they do their investigation, because that's a common fear of people that when they file complaints. So we can go to the next one, please. Now, if you're a union or a worker advocate, there's many things that you can do as well. So one is, we heard this from Wendy too, train workers on their rights and taking action. The employer training may be awesome. It may not. It may be just kind of pro forma, going through the steps. So really meaningful, effective training on your rights and what to do and how to take action. As we said before, give input into the emergency action plans or the illness and injury prevention plans. You can form a health and safety committee, even if it's a joint labor management, such as the one in the model that Theo described. The union can also always have their own, right, to kind of bring up issues and come up with their strategies. And then another option for unions is to win contract language. Wendy referred to this as well. And then, of course, the important thing is enforce it. And there's stakeholders, that you can involve. There's, maybe shareholders, board of directors, elected officials, the media, your consumers, your clients, the public. Those are all there. And another plug for getting involved in policy. So either, legislation or LOHP standard setting. We know that, we don't necessarily have the health and safety laws that we need and we deserve. We have the ones that we're able to pass. And so if worker voice and workers' experiences aren't part of that process, that's what gets these things passed, right? Is countering what employers will say, which is often, we don't need more regulations, we can monitor ourselves. It's fine, and workers need to be there to say, no, this is the human impact of not protecting us. So yes, get involved in movements to stop climate change. This is the other thing, is that we can address kind of the current issues as they're presenting, or we can also go to the root cause and try to change what the future is going to look like. So in the next slides, I have a few examples of that. I won't read it all off, but these are ways that some unions, I think the labor movement, when it's at its best, it's fighting not only, right, for the working conditions of their own members, but really looking at the big picture, what's happening in the world, and trying to get at the root causes of things. So, unions can do things like demand electric vehicles, solar panels, green space, things that will curb the fossil fuel industry. These are all things that the labor. Next slide, there's some examples of looking at kind of the root causes of a violence angle. And so things, there's a couple unions that have been really on the forefront of trying to improve mental health coverage. Again, not just for their own members, but for example, those covered by Kaiser, right? Or enforcing mental health parity laws. There's also a program similar to what you described, Theo, from the Sheet Metal Workers International Union on having kind of peer support and an early intervention for mental health. And then also, gun reform, there's many unions that have been on the forefront of saying, hey, maybe this is also something that needs to be addressed that's leading to some of these mass shootings. So there's many ways to take action. We wanted to leave you with that. And LOHP is a resource. We have a bunch of things. So we have an online guide that has some sample bargaining language if you're looking for union contract language on a range of hazards, including some of the ones we've talked about today. We have a lot of materials that are meant to be for workers, including different languages, low literacy friendly, et cetera, on heat, wildfire smoke, et cetera. And we offer training, and it's kind of a wide range, everything from, something that's just tailored for your industry, for your workers, the things that you're facing in your language that's limited to ongoing classes that are really meant to build leadership for stewards and leaders. So you can find all of that on our website, and we're happy to hear. And lastly, I'll just mention, we also have free training for small business owners on, if you are that business that wants to do it better, right? You want to have a good plan. You want to do right by your workers, some tools to make that easier for you. So I think with that, we can stop the slides. And I'm happy to hear if you have some questions that you can come up, and I encourage also the other panelists, like, scan the question section and take any that that you're interested to follow up on.
Yeah, we had one question come in from an attendee. Wendy, I saw you give an answer in the Q&A, but I thought that I'd just share it with the group to see if there are any other thoughts. This person asked, teachers' role as first responder has already been established in literature. However, is national policy also considering and acknowledging their role? In this case, what policy shift has been made regarding selection and induction of teachers in this regard?
Wendy, do you want to take that one?
So my answer was just that, so in California, they're not necessarily considered first responders. They're considered essential workers, which means if an emergency happens at their workplace, they're required to stay there until all of the students are safely away from the campus. So that's maybe a little bit different. And I don't know that we've had any kind of collective discussion about what that role is or what it looks like in California at all. Something we should think about.
And Jason, I'm wondering if you have, if you want to speak to this one. There's a question that says, is there a precedent for including workplace immigration raids into emergency plans? Or is this something that can be included?
Is it, you said immigration rates?
Yeah, immigration raids. So
Oh,
for example,
raids.
immigration
Yes.
law enforcement by ICE. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hot topic right now. It can definitely be considered an emergency in the fact that it's massively disruptive to the population. It's also an issue of continuity of operations and planning around that as well, because if there is a dramatic shift in population, whether it's an ICE raid or COVID, that drastically impacts how even the business operates. And so having plans for that, definitely from a protection standpoint, uh, I think it is advised for companies to be very vocal about stances that they're taking to protect employees, because for those who are at risk for those types of raids, it clearly is an emergency.
Yeah, I actually was talking to an organization yesterday. There's a whole coalition in Oakland that they're training employers on that same subject, right? Like what they can do. There's very practical things like, there are areas that are open to the public or accessible to immigration officers, but those that are considered private are not. So delineating that clearly, asking whether the agent has a warrant that's signed by a judge or not. If they don't have to be let in. So just for them to even be informed, right? What are your obligations? What are your rights? And how can you protect your workers? And it's absolutely a health and safety issue. There was a recent raid on a farm where it caused mass chaos. It was conducted, very chaotically, and someone actually, went up on the roof to escape and then actually died falling from the roof. So it's a very, very acute issue and very relevant right now. Yeah, and I have Monique from LOHP pointing out that we have met actually many employers through our small business training class that are very conscientious about health and safety. So absolutely. Yeah. And while we wait for other questions to come in, if any of the panelists have just any parting thoughts that they also want to leave, you're welcome to jump in as well.
I'll just weigh in on this question of ICE raids as emergencies and add that in addition to preparing the workforce and giving them education on their rights, and of course, all employers should make sure that they act upon those rights. That's the least they can do. It's also a mental health issue. As this context is increasing, as we're expecting more of these raids, it makes doing certain types of work more pressure, more stressful. And I think that the more that employers recognize that and provide resources for employees to take breaks, to correspond with each other and share accurate information, I think these are things that are preventative in themselves.
Yeah, and I'll jump in on that. I agree 100% on that, Theo. I would also add the psychological impact of planning for the entire household. I have children at home, and if there was an incident that impacted me in Berkeley, and I was not able to get home, there's a lot of stress that can come with that. And so the whole idea of being displaced from your family, regardless of the cause, right? And having no recourse in that moment to be able to care for those who are depending on you can create extreme stress. And so I do think that it is very important that we, empathize with those who are facing that on a daily basis under these circumstances, because it is very real.
Mhm. Well, are there any other questions that you want to flag for us?
Not currently, but I just wanted to point out that Monique has been putting out some really great resources in the chat for anybody to check out.
Thanks, Monique. Wendy, any last comments that you would like to contribute?
No, I just love how all of our presentations kind of built on each other. So you were able to go deeper into the things to help resolve the issue that I started with so that those won't happen.
That's the product of really good planning and good design. So kudos to Alejandra for
You can't go wrong with a panel like this. It's a dream team over here. All right, well, I guess then we will close out, and thank you everyone so much for coming. I know that these webinars are recorded and then they live on the site for COEH. Oh, and I'll say one more thing is that about a year ago, LOHP collaborated with COEH to do a webinar on workplace violence particularly, and that new law. So if that's something you have an interest in, you can check that one out in the recordings from last year as well. And thank you again to COEH for hosting us. Thank you everyone for coming.
Of course,
So
thanks
our amazing
everybody.
panelists, thank you. And thank you, Will, for your work behind the scenes as well.
Thanks for driving, Will.
thanks
Of
everyone.
course, thanks everybody.